Hey, time for some Type 40, extra Type 40, video exclusive Type 40 here and now with me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks. Welcome back to the channel. Type 40 Extra is our after show, but it's also a before show and an in-between show to all the podcasts and live streams and other Type 40 content that we put out here on the channel. This is where we scroll the view screen for the sights and sounds of the entire Whooniverse, those fixed and not so fixed points. And we bring in other people too, sometimes under duress, to talk about whatever is the pressing topic of the day. Not much duress required this time, of course. It's I've got Alex Storer back on the show. Here he is.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Alex. Are you okay?
Yeah, pleasure to be here again.
Busy morning?
Always.
It has been a big morning for you, hasn't it? Because another project has manifested, hasn't it? And it's out there as of now. We're going to get stuck into that. We're going to have a bit of a preview here with Alex of something very, very specific. Now, if people haven't heard of you before, Alex, I just want to say that they've seen your name, haven't they, on the covers of a set of 3 very, very popular ebooks, haven't they, over the last 3-4 years now, is it? So where would they have seen your name before?
Since COVID started happening, and we've been putting those exhibition-themed ebooks out, and people might have also spotted my name on the back of the real-time DVDs for Doctor on Display as well.
Oh yeah, that's you too, isn't it? So you're a writer, but you're also a designer and an artist, aren't you? So you wear many hats, and a musician, and all these other things.
That's right. Yeah, man of many hats.
How are you with practical stuff? Do you count yourself as a crafter?
I can, if I know what I'm doing, I can put my mind to it and generally do a decent job.
Do you think you could ever try your hand at this?
No.
This is that's a very quick answer there, Alex. Almost like a reflex action, wasn't it? So this is, I think you probably gauge there by the size. This is a giant Dalek that's made of hay. We're actually traveling a little bit in time here. This was back in 2015 at Park Farm in Hurlston in Nantwich. And yeah, this was an enormous hay Dalek that became somewhat of a tourist attraction. It was attached to an ice cream store. So have you ever seen this before?
No, I haven't. That's brilliant.
Because obviously the Daleks, they are a familiar sight, aren't they, to generations of Brits. And it's surprising, isn't it, the fact that for creatures that have fueled the nightmares of children, mainly in Britain, but, all over the world, after a fact, it had a sort of ripple effect, didn't it, with the original series of Doctor Who. But for such fearsome creatures, it's extraordinary how many British families are prepared to give them house space, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the closest I ever came to anything like that was when I was little. I tried building a Dalek out of cardboard boxes after I'd seen the Doctor in the TARDIS video on top of the pops. So I got half a ball or something, put it on the top for the dome, and gradually made larger boxes going down, and then tried to cut the back out so I could get inside it. Stuck a neg whisk on the front, and the whole thing was a disaster.
I think that's what they call kit bashing now. When you take one thing, I don't know if it really applies if you're using a cornflakes box and say the box that your mum's microwave came in. But yeah, for the purposes of this conversation, why not? Yeah. So I think this is probably the biggest Dalek I've certainly ever seen in the wild, made completely of hay. I don't know. I suspect it would have been mulch many years ago by now, but really, really quite a thing, I thought. Yes, so if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the cloister bells too, so you get all the notifications about what's going on next here and when, whatever it is that we're talking about. Because, in case you hadn't heard, it is Doctor Who's 60th anniversary year. If you hadn't heard, I mean, quite frankly, if you were relying on the BBC themselves to tell you, then it's possible you might not have heard. But Doctor Who does turn 60 years old this very year. And whilst it's understandable that our attention focuses on the Time Lord himself blowing out yet more candles in 2023, it's also the anniversary of his oldest enemies, isn't it, Alex? The dreaded scourge of the Whooniverse themselves, the Daleks. And it's a curious thing with the Daleks because they look fearsome, they sound awful, but it's the truth that somehow these creatures, these diabolical pepper pots, they have burrowed their ways into the hearts of generations of people, haven't they?
I believe isn't Dalek in the dictionary as well. It's like it's become a household name. I remember once being in a supermarket and one of the staff there working on the aisle suddenly shouted up to a colleague, "Can you send me the Dalek?" And I got all excited thinking, oh, they got some Daleks. And the friend came around the corner with one of those little trolley things that they use to stand on to get up to the top of the shelves, which they'd obviously affectionately called the Dalek because of its shape and the fact that it was on little casters.
Anything like that comes on casters. I know that I was working in an artist studio for a while, and they'd got a trolley on casters that could rotate like that too, with all the supplies in there, and they call that their Dalek as well. It's entered into what they call the lexicon, isn't it? What I find surprising, though, Alex, is that for such as the Daleks, such a distinctive cultural touchstone, but also something that has been marketed so thoroughly over the last 60 years, that in this entire fandom that is full of list makers, nobody has ever attempted, have they, to pull together all the informations about toy Daleks, all the various details and dates and stats about that. Nobody's ever done that before, have they?
No, not in one place. I mean, obviously, things like the Transcendental Toy Box book has got everything in it, but that's in the mix with everything else. I don't think it even occurred to me when I first started thinking about this that it was actually filling a gap in the marketplace. Because, you know, when you get these merchandise specials or what have you,
Yeah.
it covers everything. And you normally have a one page on the Daleks, or it's always the same photograph of the 60s Marks model.
Yeah.
And yeah, nothing ever feels in detail. Like much of today's culture, it's sort of rushed and fast. And I've had this project in my mind for a long time, or a project, and it sort of took a while for me to sort of formulate what I wanted to do with it. And I was actually laid up with a bad back problem earlier this year with a slip disc, so I couldn't work, I couldn't make music, couldn't do any design or artwork. So what can I do? I can write. So, you know, your creative part of my brain that always needs feeding or always needs a project was thinking, maybe it's the time to write about Daleks.
It kicked in. It kicked in, and you filled that gap in the market this very week, didn't you? I saw this. You put out the social media last week. We talked about it a little bit on Type 40 Live, but this is evolution of the toy Dalek, isn't it?
That's
and
right.
People can get it via 70.net. But for the people who may not know exactly what is the end result,
it is 100 pages of basically a history of the sort of toy Daleks from the 1960s right through to present day. I've got over 300 photographs in there, most of which were purpose taken for the book. It's not it is written from a personal point of view, really. It's not a very sort of factual history. I didn't want to go into the history of the various manufacturers because that's sort of been told before, but really the thing that has always fascinated me is how the different models and toys over the years have differed in accuracy and things like the shape and the smaller little details like the angles of the skirt or really sort of sad geeky things like that, which are all crucial to making the Dalek right. And we've seen it go from the very early days of it being quite dramatically inaccurate to today's models, which are really just joyful because they're so perfect and accurate.
I suppose the history of the toy Dalek is very much the history of licensed toys generally, isn't it? And how things have changed over the decades, whereby I think initially when toys of any TV show started to appear, which I'm not sure when that would have been, but there were tie-in items for example, the strand of shows that were called Watch with Mother, weren't they, in the early 50s, where people could send away to get a puppet of Muffin the Mule and things like that. But the things that were sent out to the kids, they bore little resemblance to what was on screen. And this would happen a lot all through the 50s and the 60s, and you know, things that people would get free in cereal packets and all that kind of thing. But back then, it was probably enough wasn't it? Because obviously, and TVs were much, much smaller, and they were on their screens very fleetingly. Particularly before VCRs, people couldn't go back and study the preciseness of the details of these characters, could they? Until some while after, if something generally looked like a Dalek, then it was a Dalek and it all was good. But tastes change, don't they? And the markets change, and now we have this sort of world and this entire sector, I suppose, that revolves around intellectual property and things. We need things to be accurate now, don't we? But I think back then, when you talk to people who had some of those original Dalek toys in particular, they talk about all they really cared about was the playability of it. They wanted to play.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, you think back to the 60s, not only was the Dalek itself unlike anything anybody had seen on film or television before, it was a new challenge for toy manufacturers. So anything I think that was produced that bore that distinctive shape, it will have done the job for the fans. I mean, one of my main contributors, Richard Hayes, is a fantastic writer and a science fiction aficionado. He was a kid in the 60s, so he has a first-hand experience of the Dalek mania and getting the Marx Daleks and the Cherry Lees and the Hertz Daleks and that sort of thing. So there's some great pieces from him in the book that have those recollections, which obviously me being a couple of generations younger don't have. So it really bridges it all quite nicely.
So here you are. This is familiar territory for you. You've been working with John Collier, haven't you, on those Blackpool exhibition books, and recently Longing for Longleat this year. So this is a format that you're very adept at working with, isn't it? At packaging this kind of volume of information up for people in easily digestible chunks. But this is different from the other works. It's a more personal project, do you feel?
Yeah, well, it is solo. I mean, the Blackpool books, John collated and designed them with my sort of input, whereas this is sort of me from scratch, designed it all myself, collated it all, and then got a great small bunch of people involved with it, like, as I said, Richard Hayes, Philip Brennan, Mark Dunn, Christopher Hill of the Space Museum, John Collier, and our very own Simon Horton. So everybody that I knew that would have had something to say, I thought, yeah, these are the right people to get involved in this, because they've got those memories, or they've got the right sort of approach to looking back and looking at the toys and the models, and sort of mulling over questions like, why do we collect? What's the obsession with Daleks? Why do we need more and more of them? Why aren't we content with just one?
Yeah, I've got the Dalek. I don't need another one.
Yeah.
No Doctor Who fan ever said that.
I mean, I think a lot of it, from my point of view, was when I was little, when I was a kid in the early 80s. That was a time when you couldn't even get any sort of Dalek merchandise. After the Dennis Fisher and the Palitoy models sort of stopped being produced in the late 70s, there was a period where there was just nothing, and that was around the time where I got into the show, and the only thing I wanted was a toy Dalek, and they just didn't exist. So I think once the likes of Dapol came through and everything subsequently, and even in later years, I've just been playing catch up.
So was it a case of you needed to put a lot of these things into context? It was an itch that you'd wanted to scratch yourself for years. Do you think, well, if I'm going to do this anyway, if I'm going to do the intellectual work, I may as well make it look pretty and see if anybody else could be interested in the end result?
That's it, because I think whatever, if you're working on a creative project, whatever, whether it's music, art, or writing, I think if you're really into it and enjoying what you're doing, then other people are bound to love it as well. And when you're in Who territory, and Daleks in particular, then it's a given. But I think, as I found because I've had a lot of contributions to the book in terms of images from different fans' collections, and every collection is a treasure trove. They're not all the same, and everybody's got different versions, different variants, older ones, newer ones. And it was just great to be able to go through decade by decade, manufacturer by manufacturer, and sort of really illustrate all the main, most popular, or perhaps best produced scale models and toys. I know some fans are averse to calling them toys, but it's what they are. And there's figurines as well. I didn't cover games or general Dalek merchandise. I really wanted to focus on things like these.
That's what I was wondering, because the title of the book is Evolution of the Toy Dalek, and there've been lots of different kinds of Daleks. There've been cuddly Daleks, haven't there? As you say, there've been Daleks that have been component parts of games. There are ceramic Daleks. There are
inflatable
Daleks all that manner of thing. So to you, what makes something distinct as being a toy rather than just a collectible? Does it have to have moving parts, or what does it need?
I think that is a sort of the question that I've asked throughout the book, which I probably didn't draw a conclusion on. I think, it's, you get a figurine like these amazing things from Eagle Moss, which are probably the most accurate, intricately detailed models that we've had, because they even include the little imperfections like the stalks on the top of the domes, or screws, or broken slats and that sort of thing, or wonky neck rings, and that's what makes them really special. But they are more for display purposes. It's like when I was younger, when I was a boy, you want to get a Dalek to play with your other toys or whatever. And I think, it needs to move, it needs to have articulated parts. And toys are generally made out of plastic, whereas models also are, but they tend to sometimes be more inanimate and that sort of thing. Although the one common point that any Dalek toy or model has is its fragility when it comes to the appendages.
Yes, they are so easily broken if not handled with care, aren't they? So this is the thing with Daleks with me. When I look across my own collection, what I do a lot of the time is I look at the patterns in my own buying, and obviously with Doctor Who, it's had these, I suppose you could say it's had peaks and valleys in terms of its popularity and its viability to be marketed to the audience, hasn't it? And yet during all of that time, something with the Daleks has remained, hasn't it? There've been items of Dalek merchandise out even when Doctor Who wasn't a thing anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a subculture in themselves.
Subculture.
As I wrote the various sections of the book, there was mini revelations along the way. They outlasted the original run on television, and into the mid 90s, you could still buy the Dapol Daleks. They were pretty much the only thing on the marketplace by that point, but they were still there. They were still available.
They were a remnant, weren't they? They felt like a remnant from the original sort of 60s incarnation of Dalek Mania. Dalek Mania is something that gets spoken about with bated breath within fandom, even now, doesn't it? More with the generations, not so much the people that were there. I mean, we had the late Ian McLaughlin was on the show last year, and he put Sarah and myself straight about Dalek Mania. He said it was nowhere near as big as the history books would have you believe, but it was a thing. It did happen, didn't it? But in the decades since then, we've kind of mythologized it all a little. When do you class that period of Dalek mania? And were there more Daleks produced during that time than since, or is it just that was very much something at the time felt like it was breaking new ground because it was pre-Star Wars and pre-lines and lines of figures?
That's right, yeah. We back in 65, 66, when the first Rangers came out from Marks and Shirley and what have you, they were the first real big range of merchandise from the time with a TV series like that. And I guess because the Daleks had taken everybody by storm on TV, there was a real appetite and a demand for the models when they came out. So I think if you're a kid back then it would have felt like a big thing. It would have been new and exciting. And I think for those of us that grew up through the Star Wars era, the Star Wars figures, or even Masters of the Universe or Thundercats or what have you, anything from those big franchises in the late 70s and early to mid 80s, when you started to just get endless swathes of huge ranges of toys that you could never possibly get all of, you forget that back 20 years previous to that, what may in hindsight have been quite a small or moderately sized range of toy probably felt huge at the time.
What rules did you set yourself when you began putting this ebook together? So did you decide on the page count before and think this is going to be 100 pages? whatever happens, and think, okay, I'll spend, say, I'll put 20 pages on each decade. Did you give yourself any limits like that? Or did the project sort of change the more that you uncovered, the more photography that you managed to get?
Absolutely, yeah, it grew and grew. I mean, I thought it might be about 50 pages when initially it was just going to be my own sort of thought. It was, I think, I started off thinking about comparing the models in my own collection.
Mm.
But then I soon realized that was going to be a little bit, I mean, it's always going to be self-indulgent, but a little bit short-sighted. I thought we need other voices in there alongside my own, from fans that are older than me to who can remember, you know, years before that, or other fans that just have a different different aspect to collecting that I
Different
do.
connection to the
Yeah,
Daleks themselves, and a connection to collecting.
and there's a friend of mine, Mark in Australia, who's one of the contributors to the book. He took a lot of photos of his own collection in his hugely impressive Who Cave. So that illustrates a lot of the sections, because he's got stuff that I don't. And the more images we got, because one of the things that predated the book was back in one of the lockdowns, in the moment of boredom, I started photographing various Dalek models, or the Eagle Moss figures, or the character options ones, just because they're just such fun to photograph when you put some backgrounds in and try and light them creatively. It's just a bit of a fun pastime. But I got
To
some really
bring
great
them to
photos
life
out of that. Yeah,
almost.
absolutely. So a lot of those photos have ended up going in here, and it just grew and grew. And when you're writing a project like this, you sort of get into it and it becomes more fun. And I realized that, like, my earlier pages were a little bit shallow, so you'd go back and revise it, make it a bit less personal, a bit more factual. So it just grew over time in, well, quite a short space of time, but it just, yeah, it evolved into probably 3 times longer than I anticipated it being. Although my plan was always to do it by decade.
See, so it was quite organic then. You allowed yourself play, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage in working to a digital publication like this, is you've got no limits. You're not, you have your own time frame for it. You're not bound by print and production costs and all this, that, and the other. You can just make it as big or as small as you want it to be. You can add to it at a later date. You can make corrections. It's just a good format. And also, this fitted in with the sort of mantra of the projects that I've worked on with John, and that was by fans for fans for free.
The various sketches, for example, of the Rollikins and things like that you've got in this, they're very, they speak to the individuality, I think, of not just the toy themselves, but of how it felt to play with. I think I've handled Dalek Rollikin twice in my entire. I've read so much about them and seen so many pictures, but I've handled a Rollikin precisely twice. And I was looking at your how you've positioned the pictures there. It's very much that feeling of them wobbling around a little bit, and they feel as if they could be quite brittle in your hand. And it's the same with the distinctive Dapol Daleks as well. It seems to me, from because you were kind enough to send me a preview copy of this. So when I was sort of flipping through it and taking it all in, the way that you'd shot it, the way that you'd arranged the photography, really accentuated the individual personality of each model. I liked how you didn't try and haven't ever made, I don't feel you've made excuses for any of these toys. And, oh, well, it was only the 1970s. Oh, well, it's like, this is what they were like in all their glory. This is what it felt like to have one in front of you on the carpet where you were playing. There's so much love in this book. There always is in everything that you've done, be it the Blackpool stuff, your other ebook Up Close is the same. And here, I think this is the most successful to date at communicating the excitement of playing with these toys. You know what? Not just playing with them either, of simply having them in one's life.
That's very kind to say, and I think that's exactly what I wanted to achieve with this, because there is a certain pleasure in beholding these things, whether you're still young enough to trundle them around on the carpet or on a desk, or whether you just enjoy looking at them in the cabinet. There's just something about them, and yeah, I think it's just one of those things.
I like the idea that there's a trundle factor to each Dalek toy. Do you have a favourite? After putting this 100-page ebook together, do you have a favourite?
Yes, I think. Well, it's difficult to pick one out. This one that I held up earlier is one of my very favourites, the Eagle Moss Death Zone Dalek, and their 5 Doctors Destroyed Dalek is also one of my very favourites, because it's one that I'd always dreamed of having from a young age. They all offer something different. You know, you can look at any of them and they remind you of the first time you saw them on TV, or they remind you of your favourite story. It's quite tricky to choose. If I was to keep just one, it would be a hard decision to make.
So given the fact that the models, that Death Zone Dalek, that's only come out quite recently, hasn't it?
Oh, that was 2017, I think. Yeah.
Was it? Oh, time
flies.
flies.
It was one of the subscriber only editions.
Oh, I see.
So I tracked it down on eBay.
I know that Eagle Moss has only really been a thing this last 6 or 7 years, isn't it? So to think that you grew up with Daleks, and we've spoken before about your Dalek collection. I know you've got a lot of Dalek toys anyway, but to think that something could come out in relatively recently, and you still think, no, this is sort of my prized one. This is the one. Of course, something else could come along too, couldn't it? That's the beauty of these things.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think I come to the realization in the book that the character options Dalek is the one that I'd always dreamed of in terms of its size and its accuracy. They're just brilliant pieces of work. But I also, when Eagle Moss first came out in 2013, I think it was, I didn't really pay much attention to it. I thought, oh, this is just another load of things to have to collect, and I've got enough. You know, I don't have a huge collection of Daleks, but I've got a nice, satisfactory size collection. I thought, oh, I've got room for more. Then I got one day, and I thought, this is really nice, and that led to another, and so on and so forth. So,
because there was a time, wasn't there, less than 2 decades ago, where as a Doctor Who fan, if you were so minded as a Doctor Who fan, or even just a Dalek fan, you could probably set out through scouring toys shops and second-hand shops and maybe auction places and even eBay, and you could probably scramble together a decent collection of pretty much every Dalek that had ever been put into production, certainly toy-wise. It probably wasn't impossible, was it? But when the explosion happened again in 2006 and all this new merchandise sprung up around new Doctor Who, and with the Daleks so much an intrinsic part of it, the sky's been the limit ever since, hasn't it? Now we have a long-running line of collectibles from character where they put out sets called Evolution of the Daleks there, don't they? And you can watch, you get a set of 3, is it 2? No, it's 2 Daleks from each story. And they've been doing that as a part work in toy form, haven't they, now, for a few years. So obviously, when it comes to your ebook, is this something that you consider a project that you will be updating at a later date?
I mean, there's another wave of History of the Daleks sets on the horizon, which are instantly going to make this book out of date. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, History of the Daleks sets is like going in and seeing empty spaces on supermarket shelves, because they're just so hard to get hold of, with people buying them in bulk or scalpers getting them for eBay. It's a challenge getting hold of them. But yeah, certainly, 15 or so years ago, you could get like 60s Cherry Lee Daleks or the Dapol Marks reproduction quite easily on eBay, whereas now some are much rarer, or they're much more expensive to get hold of.
See, what I like about them, what I appreciate about them now, and what I think I enjoyed about having the Daleks that I had when I was a child. I only had one. I had the Palatoy one, and yeah, he lost all his accessories and things like that over the years, and the colours all faded and things like that. But I remember how it felt. It's as if the dimensions of them, they're so perfect to fit into a child's hand to do that trundling, isn't it? And those other designs, they just wouldn't have worked. But you think it's so natural. Your hand just fits around one perfectly, or as if the Dalek was designed to fit into a small child's hand. And obviously they're upscaled now. Yeah, I've got several of these Product Enterprises Daleks. They
were excellent. 90s. I mean, they were a nice update on the old Palitoy. which I think this one is still remembered as the most fondly remembered Dalek toy of the classic era, because it was so much better than whatever had gone before it at the time, and it spoke. But I think Product Enterprise did an absolutely brilliant job with these of updating this.
Yeah, it's the same one. Yeah, mine doesn't talk anymore. I think I need to put some new batteries in it. Of course, Daleks were marketed, weren't they, from very, very, very early on in the life of Doctor Who. They jumped right on it and saw the potential after they caught the public's imagination so much. But in a sort of weird twist of fate, really, the toy Daleks actually did end up on screen in Doctor Who, didn't they? Several times. So
yes, I guess I mentioned in the book as well, because obviously prior to that, the Marx Daleks had featured, they'd been blown up on screen, and they got blown up later on again when they were in Planet of the Daleks, whereas the Hertz models there, they were showing the creation on the production line.
So when let's go back to the ebook for now. It's just been published. Where can people download this from? And where are your social medias? Which do you do?
Well, the book is available on my Who fan site, which is 70.net. That's a website I've been running since 2002, I think, which I resurrected last year. So I thought it's a good home for a project like this. And I can generally be found on Facebook and Twitter as The Light Dreams, which is my sort of music name. So there's all different aspects of my work on those channels as well.
And you've put out another ebook before, haven't you? A similar title called Up Close. So if people haven't seen that, how would you describe this to them?
Yeah, Up Close has also been updated and expanded this month as well. It's its second update, actually, because again, that's a project that does sort of feel like it could keep growing. That is an extension in some ways of the exhibition books, because it is about conventions and exhibitions and getting up close, as the title suggests, to the props, the costumes, and the actors from the series. It's about taking, you're stepping through the screen and seeing these things for real. So that is a book that brings together. It started off as a project of, I've got all these photographs from various conventions and exhibitions and stuff. I thought it'd be great to do something where all the photos are together in a book or a project. And that led to just writing about it, writing up the memories of conventions, my first conventions, and that sort of thing. There is a section on collecting Daleks in there, which I suppose might have been the genesis of this project, because it touched on some of the same things. But I look at the music. There's an interview with Dominic Glynn. There's an archival interview that I did with Steve Camden back in 2013, which includes a lot of his own personal photographs from when he was working on the show in the late 1970s. So it's nice to bring all that together as well, because it's another aspect of that, being up close with the show. So each chapter in that book always comes back to that sort of getting up close notion. The title of which I nicked from the first exhibition of the new series in 2005, which I saw in Leicester, which was really exciting.
When it comes to exhibiting Doctor Who, Daleks are often exploited understandably well, aren't they? I've climbed inside a Dalek at the Doctor Who experience, for example. I remember some of my earliest experiences in Blackpool, in particular, that scared the life out of me. Just seeing the shape of a Dalek as the shadow was cast up against the wall. When you worked your way around, there were shadows and sounds and smells and stuff everywhere, and that is something that children have tried to recreate at home, haven't they? Not just in their bedrooms, but on the living room rug or whatever at any given chance. And all these toy Daleks, these various lines that have been produced over the years, that's something that's facilitated quite well, hasn't it? And helped grow imaginations too. Where do you think this could go in the next few years? Obviously, because the Daleks themselves are due a bit of a on-screen revamp, we've been told. And the character line, the history of the Daleks, that continues, doesn't it? But we could see a whole rebirth with this redesign that's coming next year, how do you feel about that as a collector and as a Dalek fancier? Does it fill you with dread thinking about what they're going to do to these beautiful designs next? Or you think, oh, great, more things to look at. I wonder how this is going to make me feel.
So, oh God, more things to collect. Yeah, no, it's a bit of both. It's a mixture of everything, because it makes you think back to when it was announced that the Daleks are first coming back in 2005, and it was like, oh, what are they going to have done to them? Are they going to ruin them? And in fact, that new design was brilliant, and it really brought them into the modern age perfectly. They kept all the fundamentals, which they then subsequently lost when they made the Paradigm Daleks, and I think that was a huge error, which was very quickly acknowledged and shoved under the carpet. But I think, yeah, everyone's got a little bit bored with the Bronze Daleks now. They've got the same voice. They don't have much variation. And when you look at Dalek stories of old, they were different in every story. They had more than one voice actor doing the voices. There was much more variety, and I think they've become quite homogenous. So I think they are due an overhaul. But you think, how can they better the current design? Maybe they'll go back to the classic design and see what different angle they could go at it from. That's probably what I would do, because it's a design that works, and it's not a design you should tamper with, because you start to change even the smallest thing, and very quickly you lose the essence.
In putting the book together and in all that, looking at all that photography as well, have you learned anything about the essence of Dalekness now at the end of the project, with the book out there for people to download as from this week? Have you learned anything or noticed anything about the general design and the silhouette of a Dalek, I suppose, that you'd never noticed before?
I don't think I spotted anything new, but I spotted a few things that I hadn't, in terms of, because a lot of what I ramble on about in some of the pages is looking at accuracy and things, like taking this one, for example. You think, yeah, it's a great Dalek. Then you realise, oh, hang on, it's got a central panel down the front, which Daleks don't have, and you turn it round and there's only one down the back instead of two rows of hemispheres, and the dome's too short and stuff like that, compared to like, I don't know, the Product Enterprise, which when this came out, it was like the best toy Dalek we'd ever seen, because everything, the scale, proportions, angles were just all right. So I think I've just had a greater appreciation of how manufacturing processes have evolved over time, and however it works, they put together these brilliant models and figurines and get them just more and more accurate with a greater level of detail.
It really is wonderful that these characters, and I do consider them characters, not just monsters, because the Dalek, anything that's got its own catchphrase, I think it is a character, isn't it? It's not just a bit of moving furniture and some cheap scares. There is something strangely cozy about a Dalek, and in the new series, I think that happened too. People complain that they come back too often, but I've never been entirely convinced. Never been entirely convinced about that. So if people want to get this in their lives, Alex, they can get it at your fansite 70.net there. That's out. Fabulous cover too, which has got lots of different Daleks inset, and you can try and figure out which one is which before you dip into the pages there, and all those contributors that you've got listed, whatever it is they're doing, John Collier, Simon Horton, and everybody else, Christopher Hill. Wow, yeah, it's not quite an army that you've gathered together this time. It's more I was going to say a famous six. That doesn't really work, does it? A secret six of dedicated Dalek fans, and yeah, you can see what Alex has brought to life there in the Daleks, and what they've all got to say about their experiences when you get hold of that. Well, get it onto your tablet, get it onto the device of your choice. We've been talking Daleks ourselves too over on the Type 40 podcast. You can catch up with us and our review of this classic from the mid-70s, Death to the Daleks, star John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen. And it's our Pertwee pick for the Diamond season of review shows that we're putting out at the moment on the podcast. That's myself, Simon Horton again. My God, he gets around, doesn't he? Myself, Simon Horton, and Stephen Noonan, the actor and lifelong Doctor Who fan, Stephen Noonan. We all got together to talk not just about Death of the Daleks, but we gave a bit of a nod back to the Pertwee era in general and that fabulous actor in, I was going to say, the part of a lifetime. John Pertwee had several parts of his lifetime, didn't he? But it certainly was, if not the biggest, then it's up there with another one. There's two at the top, isn't there? I think he'd probably demand
that was
we
still
stay.
the longest lasting, yeah.
Give me your social medias again, Alex. Where can people get in touch with you?
At the Light Dreams on Twitter and Facebook.
At Light Dreams, and you can reach out to us through our social media, Instagram and Twitter at Type 40 Doctor Who, or you can join us in the Type 40 Facebook group with generations upon regenerations worth of Doctor Who fans gathering there to chew through old times, old memories, to think back to the times when they were playing with their Daleks, maybe trundling them across the floor, and you get your review in there for Alex's very latest ebook. And so while you're at it, why don't you try Up Close too, as well as this one, the brand new one, Evolution of the Toy Dalek from Alex Storer and friends, available on his website. That's at 70.net. Alex, I think obviously you said this project came along for you at a time where you simply had nothing else to do. So I can see that it took up a gap in time where you
grew
couldn't
out of
do
being
anything
in
else.
pain and up to my eyeballs on painkillers, yeah.
But really, I do think it's wonderful because you could try to have got this published, couldn't you? But the fact that you put this out as an ebook for everybody to download for free and to, I suppose, to join in really with your own trek back through your childhood and your adulthood. I think these books are really wonderful. They really bring people together, and you're a fantastic designer. There's so much in this one in particular. Little instances where I'd either totally forgotten that line of Dalek toys ever existed, or there was plenty where I had no idea that they'd even been produced, and I thought I'd seen a lot of Daleks. So thank you for putting this together and for coming to talk to us about it on this edition of Type 40 Extra.
No, it's a pleasure.
And yeah, that's it for another one. Yeah, leave us a comment in the comment section down below, by all means, and be sure to get Alex's new ebook into your life. That's it for this one. What else have I got to tell you about? Yeah, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the cluster bell so you get all the notifications about what's coming next and when it's coming at you. More podcasts and live streams, more extras with more guests, no doubt. We always have the time, if you have the space, here at Type 40 Extra. Yeah, get hold of that ebook and then get back to us. See you again on the next one. Bye-bye.